Welcome to episode 56 of The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. I'm Ken Ray.
I'm Nicholas Raba.
And I'm Nicholas Tachek.
There are a lot of bad guys out there trying to steal your data. And sometimes we are all too willing to help them do that. Sometimes they're not even stealing, they're buying your data, but they're usually not paying you. Today we're looking at some of the biggest and most common threats to your online privacy, as well as online threats to your physical privacy. Topics we're going to be hitting today: location services that will not turn off, VPNs that are not what they seem, the privacy threats inherent in social media, and finally, forgotten piles of data. Location services as a threat to your privacy really do seem like a no-brainer, except there are a lot of apps that don't actually anonymize your location data. I know there was a thing with AccuWeather earlier this year. Do you guys remember what that was and what was going on? Because it's the weather. On the one hand, I do want to give it my location because I need to know what the weather is where I am. But then something bad seemed to be going on with this particular app.
Yeah, it was basically they had a framework built into the app that was from an ad revenue monetization service. Basically, hey, give us a bunch of data about your users and we'll give you money. And so this app, AccuWeather, was free and they wanted to make some money. And I think they claimed in the end that they didn't know what they were doing, that they did it by mistake, blah, blah, blah. Whether or not that's true, who knows? But basically what it was doing was, okay, if you have location services turned on, it's sending your location services to AccuWeather for your location and the weather there. And then it was also sending it on to the ad company. Now, if you turned off your location services, it's not supposed to be sending that information to AccuWeather anymore. You know, you could still look up your weather by a zip code or city or whatever, but it wasn't supposed to be sending any data. Well, it was then sending other data, like the names of Wi-Fi networks around you. And that technology is not really specific to AccuWeather. It's not specific to these ad companies. I believe even Apple uses it to an extent for determining approximate location. It's something called Skyhook, I believe is the technology, if I have the term correct. And it is kind of a map of the world based off of Wi-Fi access points and their names and locations. And
so wait, all that war driving everybody was doing for years and years and years, it turned into something called Skyhook?
Everybody who has a phone, who's walking around with a phone, is actually kind of participating in it, because when the phone hops on a wireless network, or, basically sees the wireless networks around it, it builds a virtual map of those Wi-Fi networks in relation to where they are in the physical world. And when you have millions and millions of users walking around with phones in their pockets that are doing this, you can actually build a pretty complex and a pretty accurate map of where everything is in relation to everything else in terms of those networks. So basically what was happening is, even if you turned off location services and weren't allowing the AccuWeather app to get those the actual GPS coordinates, it was still sending other data that could be used to identify where you were.
Right. That's really terrible too, because, I mean, if you were somebody who is privacy aware enough to say, I don't necessarily want the AccuWeather app to know when I'm sitting in a Starbucks, because chances are in Starbucks, you don't need to know the weather. Like inside. I mean, if you went to a mall or something like that, if you're somebody who turns it on for the time you need it and then turns it off for the time you don't, the assumption is, and apparently this is one of Apple's things as well, theoretically, if you say, I don't want you tracking my location right now, it's one of the rules that Apple's like, okay, so don't use anything to try to track their location. If they turn off GPS, that's sort of like an implied, they really don't want you to know where they are, so don't try to sneak around and find out where they are anyway.
Exactly, and that's in this case, it was actually Will Strafish, a iOS security researcher, basically had privacy concerns, and he said, he's taking a look at it, and he noticed something funky happening there, and he did a bit more research, and he exposed this whole thing, and that's what got the ball rolling on this. And it was because one user concerned about their own privacy noticed that something seemed wrong, something seemed funky with this. And as far as like their excuses went for we didn't know what we were doing, whether or not that's a true response or just something that they're saying to cover their butts, either way, it received a pretty large amount of publicity, and I guess steps have been taken since to basically correct the issue. But if they hadn't been called out on this, whether or not they were doing it on purpose, it would have been happening for who knows how long. And that's something that Apple, with their fairly stringent app review process, it's not something that would necessarily be caught during the app review process because it's not what they're looking for in terms of code that's doing stuff it's not supposed to be doing. Because the app can work perfectly fine with GPS normally if you're saying I want them to have the information. Right. It's not something that would be so easily caught by the kind of app reviews that are done in app stores.
Well, I mean, the app reviews that are done in app stores are pretty much to make sure that it's not, implementing any calls that aren't allowed.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
But then, I mean, really what it's trying to do is just make sure it's not going to crash when you open it.
Exactly. They want to have a good user experience because,
right.
And you'll see it actually from time to time. Back before tethering was offered by a lot of cell phone providers with your plan where you could, share your connection from your iPhone to your laptop or whatever while you're traveling. That didn't used to be offered on such a widespread basis as it is now. And right. There used to be apps in the App Store that would offer that capability, and they'd hide it. They'd say, here's right. This game, but if you click this button, enter the Konami code, all of a sudden you've got a way to share your Wi-Fi or your cellular connection with your other devices. And those would be kind of snuck through, and they'd make it into the App Store, and you'd hear about it, word of mouth or whatever, and then they'd all of a sudden hit some critical level of popularity where they'd be on all the major websites and on Twitter.
Exactly. Somebody will tweet about it going, oh, you got to get this one. It'll fix your problem. All you got to do is this and that, and you unlock this way for you to do it. I mean, that's kind of cool. But
but Apple obviously wasn't looking for that in the first place. Once they're aware of it, of course, right. They yank the app. But yeah, what you're saying is very true, Ken. They are looking for stuff that is doing stuff it's not supposed to be doing by calling the super secret Apple API calls or crashing, essentially, because it's a bad user experience.
So a question here, not to go too far off topic. We talked about how when you have location services turned off for it, you expect that it's following those rules and things like that. It's not actually doing anything, and you expect location services turned off. iOS 11, the whole turning off wireless and Bluetooth.
Yeah, that's going to change.
You expect that it's turned off, right? But
that's going to change. For people who don't know what we're talking about, if you go into Control Center in iOS 11, there's a button that will very helpfully let you turn off Wi-Fi, and it'll very helpfully let you turn off Bluetooth, except it doesn't actually turn off either of those things, because Apple has this idea that there are features in iOS 11 that you're going to want to keep using anyway, so they're going to go ahead and leave them on. They're just disconnecting you from connected devices, which is very misleading, and I think people are going to... I mean, that's the kind of thing that I gotta figure is going to be fixed in iOS 11.1.
It's going to be. They've had stuff like this in the past where they've made a UI mistake, as it were. I guess from what I've heard, also another Apple side of the argument was that there were a lot of people who would accidentally turn off their Wi-Fi or turn off their Bluetooth and then complain saying, why isn't my device working? And it would be a support burden and everything else. I mean, companies know how that goes. If you can protect the user from themselves, it's usually a good thing to do. In this case, though, because there's that aspect of security and privacy tied into it, right. When I turn off my Wi-Fi and my Bluetooth, I'm doing it for a reason. I'm not doing it to, I'm not doing it by accident. I'm not doing it because I just want to disconnect from whatever network. I'm a power user, and I know most users aren't like that. But the people who do care about that stuff really care about that stuff. So yeah, I guess.
I mean, think about if this happened a couple months ago, like right before DEF CON, the big hacker convention in Las Vegas. And the first thing you'll hear anybody tell you is turn off it. Well, get a burner phone. But if you're going to use your phone, turn off your internet, turn off your Bluetooth, turn off whatever connectivity that you have. And picture if everybody was just going to Control Center, turning it off, and still walking around a Target.
Really quickly, we should let people know it's still possible to turn those things off. It's just there are these big friendly buttons in Control Center that don't do it. So you can go into settings and you can turn those things off. I had a listener, actually, a macOS Ken listener, write to me and say, well, of course, you can always just hit airplane mode and that kills everything. And there are two things I would say about that. First of all, I don't necessarily want to kill my ability to make and receive calls. I don't want to turn my phone into a brick. I just want to be able to turn off the things I want to turn off. And the second thing is, I mean, Apple is sort of setting a bad precedent here. If they have a button that makes you think that you've turned off Wi-Fi, then why do I trust airplane mode at that point? And of course, they don't want airplanes to crash. So I guess that would be one reason. But I mean, if that button seems to say off, but doesn't actually mean off, then suddenly I mean, I'm in a weird place of wondering, can I trust Apple? Because Apple has spent years saying, seriously, you can totally trust us.
Yeah, this is one of those things that shouldn't have ever made it, out of the lab at Apple. I don't know what kind of what kind of meetings they had where they thought this was a good idea, but it wasn't. So I'm sure it will change. But I'm glad you pointed out how to fix it. You took the words out of my mouth there. That you can still turn it off. But yeah, there are a lot of reasons that aren't even security related. Like I have bad Wi-Fi spots in my house, and sometimes it is better when I'm pretty far away from the routers, just to have Wi-Fi off entirely and use the cellular connection. It's faster, it's better connection. And so I'll, in iOS 10, just turn off the Wi-Fi in the control panel and boom, I'm good to go. Well, that wouldn't be the case in iOS 11. So I think Apple will probably back this one up a little bit in the future, though.
As long as people, I mean, it's probably going to require people actually staying on them for it as well. But, there's so much new stuff in iOS 11 that we might just forget about it. It may stay a thing. So stay vigilant, I suppose, or, get used to it. One of the two. Okay, can we move on to virtual private networks or VPNs? Because this is something that I've wondered about a time or two. It is, like you guys have said in the past, there's no such thing as storing your information in the cloud. You're storing your information on somebody else's computer. And so you kind of have to trust when you're storing information in the cloud that, you trust basically that cloud minder, that cloud vendor. You trust whoever is holding that other computer. The same goes for VPNs, right? I mean, this is actually, it's weird because we think VPN is synonymous with safety, but it's only as good as the people behind it.
Exactly. That's the thing. There have been so many stories in the news over the past couple of years, but especially the past years, I guess, in larger amounts, that everybody is saying, "Oh, I need to worry about security. I'm going to get a VPN." And unfortunately, people then go to the App Store and say, "I'm going to get the cheapest one I can find," or "I'm going to go for that one that's free."
Mm-hmm. Or ranking in the charts, or
this is one of those times when you don't want to be going for the cheapest or whatever's free. I mean, you're talking about your online security. You're concerned enough about your online security that you are going to take steps to make sure it's routed through something else that's providing extra security. So trust the company that you're going to be trusting your data with. If you're just going with the cheapest app or a free one, I would honestly say if you're going with like just some cheap fly-by-night app because it's cheap, that's worse than not using any VPN at all.
Because you're routing all your data through that provider, through that service. So even though the person at Starbucks may not see all your passwords, you're sending all of your traffic through this other person's computer. Do you trust them? Do you know who they are? Or was it just the cheapest on the App Store? Was it? You really have to think about who you're putting your trust in there.
Okay, here's the question though. How do I know who I should trust when it comes to a VPN? I mean, you're in good hands with Allstate, right? I mean, that's a phrase that I've known for years. Whether it's true or not, it's a whole other thing. But I mean, we all know the names of insurance companies. We all know the names of cable providers. We all know the names of a lot of things that we know. I can name one VPN, but that's because I happen to know them because of another association that I have with a different show. I mean, there is not a one trusted name in VPNs as far as I know. So if I go online and look up, trusted VPNs, well, first of all, I have to bear in mind that the first 5, 6, 10 responses on Google may actually be sponsored. So they're about as good as their money is. I mean, how do I know what's a trusted VPN?
Well, there's thankfully there's a couple things. There are roundups every year of the best VPN software by some of the major news publications for computer stuff. So PC World, Mac World back in the day used to do it as well. And they will generally say, here are the best VPNs of 2017. And they will then list 5 or 10 of what they consider the best. They'll do the whole breakdown on features, price, what operating systems it worked with. And that will be a good basis to go with. They aren't necessarily, I mean, in the review, they'll say, this is a brand new company, so maybe you don't want to trust them as much, but you'd want to be looking for the established company, the one that's been around for a few years, that's had time to get bad press if there is bad press to exist, if that makes sense. Like, basically, you're going to want a company that's proven through a track record that they are trustworthy and that they're not going to disappear on you in 2 months. So that would be, I would say the first step would be looking at some of those roundups of the top 10 or top 5 VPNs and go from there in breaking down your choices and looking at what would work best for you. Another alternative, if you don't trust anybody else, but you trust your home internet connection, it takes a lot of extra work, relatively speaking, but you can set up your own VPN server on your home computer. You can set it up so it's got a path through your firewall, and then you could connect from anywhere in the world to your home network. You'd have to ensure that you have a computer that's on all the time, that you have an internet connection that's on all the time. Probably, backup power supplies to make sure power's on to power those devices. But then you could route through your own home network.
Yeah, and some of the higher-end routers have this functionality built in and make it really darn easy to do, where you don't need to call your friend to say, hey, help me set up a VPN here. I mean, the support for it.
The one thing to note, if you're doing it yourself, there isn't that level of support you get from a commercial company. And another issue to keep in mind is that when you're running all of your traffic through another connection for the purpose of security with a VPN, it's going to take some extra time for those web pages to load. It's really not a good idea to try and watch movies on Netflix through a VPN because depending on a lot of stuff, it can be really slow to the point where it's not even worth it. So if you're traveling around the world and you're connecting back to your home internet connection in the United States, that's a fairly long distance for the data to travel both ways through lots of different networks and undersea cables and everything else, and it's going to be slow. The benefit of the commercial VPN providers is that a lot of times they will have different VPN servers located in different countries. So you would pick the one that's closest to you wherever you're traveling, and that would give you a faster connection overall. So that's the benefit of a commercial versus doing it yourself. But if you are concerned about the security, doing it yourself will be the way to go.
So the next one I want to hit, I feel like we could probably spend an hour on, and we should try not to. One of the biggest threats to privacy is social media. The place we go to share, little things like pictures of our pets, whose name we probably put in there because isn't he so cute? We might have a picture of our pet in front of our house, which people might recognize, or, in our yards, or, pictures of that new engagement ring that we got, or maybe pictures of our kids in front of their easily identifiable school. I started off at the beginning saying half the time we're just like willing to help people steal information. I mean, I don't even think this counts as stealing. I mean, if I leave a sign in my front yard with my social security number on it, I don't think you can really then say, kind of like that guy from Lifehack or whatever it was. Not Lifehack.
LifeLock.
Was that intentional, Ken?
Thank you. No, it was not intentional at all. But like that guy from LifeLock was like, hey, here's my social security number. And oddly enough, people took it. I don't think you could really say that his information was stolen because he literally put it on a billboard. We're kind of doing that with social networks, aren't we?
Oh, yes. Totally.
All right.
You said it.
One other thing, actually, Ken, to add to the list of the stuff that we're putting online, it's not just our virtual data that can get stolen. There used to be a website that would scrape social media posts, public posts on Facebook, on Twitter, whatever, where you'd have people who were saying, I'm going on vacation, and they'd have the location data turned on, on their post. So it would be, here's your home address, and you're posting saying, right. or posting the picture of your brand new TV, and then a few weeks later, I'm going on vacation. Okay, well, you just let the thieves know that you're out of the house and you've got a 60-inch flat screen TV. It's not a good combination. So it can actually result in real world theft as well. Again, we are giving away all of this data to social media, and this data is worth a lot of money to them. We're just like, here, have it, because we want to talk to our friends from high school.
But nobody cares, because how does it affect me? Why would anybody want my data?
People don't put value on their data. They don't think about it in terms of monetary value, because we've never had to think about it in terms of monetary value. Who cares that my favorite color is, aquamarine?
And what is your favorite color?
That's not. I was like, should I say my real favorite color? Wait a second. Yeah. And so, but we never really cared about that before, and now it's, when you take all these little bits of information that add up into essentially a fairly accurate overview of a person, their likes, dislikes, what basically what ads might work for them. Suddenly, it's worth a lot of money. So these companies have a real drive to collate all this data and map our lives with it.
Yeah, there was actually a crazy thing that we, in going over notes for the show, Facebook has even talked about using an AI to create a map of the general location of everybody in the world. And, with nearly 2 billion people already signed up for Facebook, I mean, they can actually sort of do that. And on the one hand, it's almost like they're just showing off. I don't know what the point of that is, but it's crazy to think about the amount of information. It's kind of like we were talking about a couple of weeks ago with Experian, or it's kind of like we were talking about several months ago with the episode that we did on shadow profiles. I mean, it's not even necessarily about the information that I'm giving away, but then I'm sort of helping out. I'm putting icing on the cake that is me, right? I'm volunteering even more information than people already have. Used to be fun to be the mayor of places on Foursquare. Okay, well, that's great. So now they know that I'm in this particular coffee shop every day. I'm in there enough that I'm the mayor. And so either they can then target me for some sort of social engineering something or other, or they can just wait till I leave, because they know, generally speaking, as mayor of that coffee shop, I'm there for at least 2 hours. So that's 2 hours to get into my house and check out whatever they want to, or get into my house and take whatever they want to.
I've got to say, I saw so many of my friends using stuff like Foursquare, and it never really clicked for me. I mean, maybe it's that I don't go out enough, but regardless, it was one of those things where I was thinking those exact type of, I think when you're in security, you start looking at things with more of a threat model in mind. How could this be used against me or against my data? And so a lot of times things will just jump out at you and be like, why would you ever, why would you do that? Why? It doesn't matter. So, but there are lots of other things that aren't necessarily as, as silly as becoming the mayor of a coffee shop. We like to tag our food when we're at a nice restaurant. We post the pictures on Instagram. There are all sorts of littler, smaller bits of data that might not seem as silly, that might seem more important to us, but they still have intrinsic value to these companies that are collecting it. And what you were saying before, kind of about mapping the individuals, everybody on Earth. Again, going back to our shadow profiles episode, you don't even necessarily have to be a member of the social media network to be included in that map, because if enough other people know about you who are in the social media network and there's a shadow profile for you, well, you can be sure that the AI is going to be like, okay, we've got 3 people who are actually members, and we've got that 4th guy who didn't actually sign up for us, but we know he lives there too. And that's just what you can do when you have this kind. I mean, the amount of data they have here is just mind-boggling. There's no other way to put it. It's almost inconceivable how much data they have, and you can do a lot of stuff when you have that much data.
You started talking about mapping and all that data, and then I started thinking about, companies like the Ancestry companies that take your saliva sample and then give you your background and information on you, but you get reports. saying you have like 37 new cousins. I wonder if any of these companies tie any of this data to any of the online type of data. Like, will I be able to log into 23andMe and be like, oh, I could add all 37 friends to my Facebook thing based off of their DNA now? Click, 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 click. Like, but do people want that?
I have a friend that I need to actually ask a question of. I know that a friend of mine has a new sister. Only a half sister. I say only a half sister. I mean, it's a whole person, but it's a half sister who she didn't even know existed before. And somehow, and I don't know how this happened, but somehow on Facebook, they now recognize each other as sisters. They have a common parent. And they didn't even know that before earlier this year. And now they're hanging out and they're going places and they're doing stuff. And so that ends up being a happy story. But how did Facebook facilitate that?
Mm-hmm.
Probably you could assign roles to your friends, to your parents, to your sister, and then it's building that whole network of things as well. Luckily for me, there's a lot of people who are tagged as my parents and sisters and brothers and cousins and who really aren't, or maybe they are. I don't know.
All right, so here's the problem that I'm having. About the only things that we can do, I'm assuming, unless you tell me there's some secret, sort of like in the third Christopher Nolan Batman movie. If you're telling me there's a blank slate program that I can run, it's going to get me off all this stuff. I mean, a lot of this I kind of have to just know that there's a lot of stuff going on that I'm not going to be able to control. The things that we would encourage people to do here are be careful of the things you can. If you take a picture outside your house, make sure the street number isn't there. Right? I mean, tell me some of the things that I can do as far as the stuff that I do online, as far as the stuff I do. I mean, we can say on social media sites, or we can say on social networking sites, but we really are talking about Facebook. What can I do on Facebook to make sure that I am protecting myself as much as I can on Facebook?
Okay, there are a few things here, and actually one that I'll add on. Aside from just street number of your house, don't take pictures of your new credit and debit cards. Seriously, there are people who do that. They post it on social media, the number's all there, expiry. It's like, that is just one of those things where you go, oh my goodness, like, why? So yeah, don't do that. Don't take pictures of anything that's important. Even if you're taking a picture of like your desk, don't have your business documents out on the desk, or a screenshot of your computer. There have been people who have had those unfortunate tabs for certain sites that are visible in the background when you're not trying to take a screenshot of that, and then you'll get made fun of online. But moreover, a lot of it comes down to locking down your social media profiles to only be visible to friends. Make sure you're not accepting random people as your friends. Don't blindly click accept to every single friend request that comes in, because some of those people might not be real people. You might not really know them. There are, when you're talking about like a blank slate type thing, there are some reputation management services out there. They're expensive. They will go ahead and scour the web for your name, whatever data you give them, and they will automate the process of getting that information taken off of websites. And I mean, it's not 100% possible to do it. It's the internet. Everything lives forever on the internet. But in some cases that can be an option. One other thing I would suggest is there are a lot of data aggregation sites that will take what's been publicly posted. So if you have a website and your contact information is in the contact information listed for the website for the Whois data, that is a lot of times picked up by these companies that will then, it's kind of like a White Pages and some of those other websites online that will say, here's this guy, we approximate this is his age, here's where he lives, here's his siblings, his parents, and they're pretty accurate maps of people's information. There are, in little tiny links on a lot of those websites, there are, would you like to have us remove your record? And they'll say, we can't, we get this from public information, it's still technically going to be out there, but once you verify who you are, we'll take it off. And a lot of them are actually pretty good about that. So that might be something you'd want to do, is go through and do the opt-out links for some of those online sites that take all that data, and then make sure that you're, wherever possible, that you lock down your data. You can't do it everywhere. If you have, in a lot of states, if you have court records, online. Those are publicly accessible in many states, and that's a source of information for these places. Newspaper, birth records, obituaries, all that kind of stuff can have information that those websites will use. And you can't stop a lot of that stuff, but you can watch your own posts, what you're posting, maybe what your family's posting, if you could nudge them and say, hey, could you think about the security here? Not that many of them will listen,
Right.
but maybe you'll get through to them eventually. And so, yeah, you can't stop everything, but there are some steps you could take to at least kind of mitigate the damage that could be caused.
There's one other thing that I've been wondering about, and I think you might have just answered this question. What happens when a company gets sold or when a company goes under? And I'm thinking about things like, Friendster or MySpace, basically Facebook before we had Facebook. I don't know who owns either of those companies anymore. I don't think Friendster is even anything that I could access anymore. But I do know that I gave both of those places my information at one point. And I doubt that they threw it away out of the goodness of their hearts. So I guess what I'm wondering is, is there a thing that you should do when a company gets sold? And then if that happened 5 years ago, because I know MySpace, I was on MySpace before it got sold to News Corp, and then News Corp actually sold it to someone else. And I probably haven't been to my MySpace page since before either of those sales happened. Is there any point in going back and trying to figure out what happened to that information and seeing if it can get killed, or do I just have to keep an eye out going forward? Or should I actually think about one of those reputation management things where they go and do the hard work for me at a cost?
So some of these sites, you can manage your profiles. You could remove them. You could delete them. And this, of course, is before they get handed over to somebody else.
Right.
Once it's been handed over, and who's to say that they didn't also sell them a old backup of the database of users as well? But, there's that crossing your fingers, hoping. But who was it? It was LiveJournal when they were sold. Mm-hmm. I remember everybody was just going to delete their entries, their profiles, their accounts, because a lot of people didn't like where it was sold to. And I guess a lot of it comes to who you're trusting your data with. And I guess at that point there wasn't a lot of trust. So if I was in that situation, I'd probably change the email addresses and the names to throwaway information and try to scrub or delete the pages or accounts. So at least maybe there'd be a variant, or whatever version was sold doesn't have appropriate contact information. But again, if there's different versions and backups and whatever they feel they want to do with the data at that point is going to be all up to them. Because if I was that company and I saw the news going on that everybody's deleting all their stuff and changing their information, I'd go, okay, well, tell me what percentage of users just did this, and then those percentage of users grab their old data so we have it and their accounts are ready and live for when we go live.
The to add on to that a bit, I would say when you're giving your data to a company in the first place, MySpace back in the day or whatever, they might have a certain privacy policy for what they're going to do with that data. And a lot of times you'll have a company that says, we won't share your data with anybody else. We're only using it for ourselves. And when they sell that company, the new owners might not adhere to that privacy policy. Now, if you have a legitimate company, they will send out a notice that their privacy policy is changing. And it's usually something along the lines of, if you don't agree with our new privacy policy, stop using the service before this date. And so you actually kind of have to pay attention to some of those emails. A lot of times, like an annual privacy policy notification, they'll send you an email saying they have a new privacy policy. Take the time to read it if it's a site that you have your personal information on. And yeah, do what Nick suggested. Go ahead and change your personal information, because you're going to be overwriting a database entry. So you don't want to just delete your account straight up, because a lot of times that will still sit there in some deleted accounts database in case you want to reinstate your account. A lot of services have that capability. And again, depending on when they do their backups, how often they do their backups, if they're giving the backups to whatever company bought them out, yeah, that data could still be going to somebody. But yeah, it would definitely be a good idea to change your name, change your email address, maybe make a throwaway email address so you can click the confirm delete information when a lot of times they'll say, do you really want to delete your account? You have to respond to this email. So putting in a completely nonsense email won't help you there. But a lot of times you just have to be kind of aware of what information you're giving out in the first place. And no, you don't ever think about, oh, hey, what happens if Facebook goes under? I mean, we're all screwed. Truthfully, you don't think about what might happen to a company in the future when you're giving your data to them in the present. You're thinking, oh, I want to meet up with my friends, or, oh, I want to have access to this feature or that feature. So yes, I'll like and share and click. So it's just something to think about and keep in mind that your personal data does have value, even if you don't think of it that way. And there are other companies that might buy out that current company sometime in the future because that data has value to them too. And depending on who you want to have that data, it might make you think twice about handing it all over in the first place without thought.
So I think my favorite thing that anybody said in this episode I think that award has to go to you, Mr. Toczek. Your data has value. Your personal data has value, even if you don't think of it. I mean, you guys were hinky earlier about whether or not you wanted to say what your favorite color was, but who knows what question you answered several years ago. I know you're a security guy, so, they said, what's your favorite color? And you probably said dog. But I mean, you really do have to think about, even if a piece of information seems completely useless, like I was at this place, people take pictures of their Starbucks order, and their Starbucks order has their name on it. Your personal data does have value. I mean, despite so much going on, like things with the Experian stuff, I never gave Experian my information, but they have like a whole thing on me. And maybe I never gave my information to Facebook, but they got a shadow profile on me. At the very least, there are things that you can do to help protect your own information, and hopefully we've sort of turned you on to some of those today. We do have show notes, by the way, if you want to be reminded of what some of those were. The place to find those show notes is securemac.com/checklist. The address again is securemac.com/checklist. If you have a particular question, ways that you might want to protect your own online privacy, or some other security question you have, or if there is a topic you would like to hear us hit. Now, we do have an email address as well. The address is checklist@securemac.com. That address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, please do remember this. You are listening to The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. And we'll talk to you next week.